Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 37 preview where I'll be discussing some of the key players that you should be looking to buy and sell in your FPL teams. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So let's start with the decision that a lot of people have this week, which is whether it's worth selling Alexander Isak to Ollie Watkins. Ollie Watkins, rightfully so, is a player that a lot of people are looking at, given the fixtures, given everything that Villa have to play for, and given the fact that when he's on the pitch this season, despite a little bit of competition with Duran and then Rashford, he scores goals and he gets big chances. So I can absolutely understand this, and I'm going to try not to sit on the fence with it. But the issue is, unless you've got like an easy route, and I think selling maybe Jean-Philippe Mateta to Watkins, and we'll discuss Crystal Palace in a bit, that feels relatively easy to say yes to. But if your route is Alexander Isak, it never feels great because Alexander Isak is a world-class player. And I always come back to hating selling players that you know in any given game can just turn it on. And Alexander Isak, for me, is a world-class forward. And I'm not saying Ollie Watkins isn't, but there's always that risk with selling a player like that they can go big, even if they're not in the best run of form. And I will note that I don't think Alexander Isak is in the best run of form right now. In the last two games, he's had 0 big chances from open play. Obviously, the game before that, he had quite a few big chances. I think it was against Ipswich, but obviously that's due to the difficulty of the opposition, I would say. He's just not looked quite at it. And actually, as of yesterday, on Tuesday the 13th of May, there was news, apparently, Alexander Isak is going to undergo surgery at the end of the season for a small minor injury. There are some suggestions it's still the groin that's playing him up. I saw someone also say it's a hernia. And I should note that this has not been confirmed by the club. This is just rumours from Newcastle accounts. But apparently he is carrying an issue. And I think if you watch Alexander Isak, ignore the data for now, just watch Newcastle. He just doesn't look quite at it. He's not making the same quality runs that he does. He's not got that same level of intensity. And I don't think it's an attitude problem because Isak will always want to score goals. Whether he's staying at Newcastle or not, and I'm pretty sure he is staying at Newcastle, he will want to score goals at the end of the season and make sure that Newcastle get Champions League football. So I don't think it's a motivation attitude thing. I think he is carrying some kind of issue. The other issue with Alexander Isak, as well as obviously this small underlying injury that he might be carrying, is that the fixtures just aren't there over the next two. So Arsenal away, I know Arsenal don't have that much to play for, but it's just never a great fixture to play in. I know Isak has scored against Arsenal before, and he could well do it again, but Arsenal away is not a fixture you look at and think, yeah, I'd love a player there. And I would argue that Everton at home isn't a perfect fixture. Now, Everton aren't the defence that they used to be under Sean Dyche, but they're still relatively solid. All I will say is if they still have something to play for at that point, Newcastle, and they've not definitely confirmed Champions League football, then they will need to probably go and at least draw that game, if not win it, and therefore you could see Isak doing fairly well, especially the final home game of the season. So I don't think I look at those fixtures and think, oh, you have to sell Isak. They're absolutely awful. But equally, when you then look at what someone like an Ollie Watkins has, you can understand why someone would look to sell him. So on Ollie Watkins, I would argue that Watkins has the best fixtures in 37 and 38 that you could arguably possibly get. They're playing against 16th and 17th in the Premier League, and that still blows my mind that that's the case, but that is the case. They play against Spurs before the Europa League final, so 5 days before the Europa League. So on the Friday, Spurs and United obviously have the Europa League final on the Wednesday, and they play against Manchester United after the Europa League final, in which case we could see rotation. I'm going to say something which a lot of people will disagree with now. I actually don't think Spurs and Manchester United are going to rotate as heavily as people think in Game Week 37. I think in the lead up to the Europa League final, they're not just going to bench all of their good players, because that would then mean that it's been like 10 or 11 days for all of the players that if they bench them in 37, since 36 going to the Europa League final. You need to maintain some level of match fitness, rhythm, confidence. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Man United and Spurs go fairly full strength from the start and then maybe bring off some of their key assets around the 60th, 70th minute. The issue with Manchester United and the Spurs is it doesn't really matter if they go full strength or not. Spurs and United's full strength teams should still get beat quite comfortably by Aston Villa. And you would imagine that Ollie Watkins still gets a lot of chances. So having Spurs and United in the next two, for Ollie Watkins, the final two, the fixtures are absolutely there to attack. If we have a look at their underlying data from the last 10 game weeks, I would say that it's quite disappointing for the pair of them, but I'm actually very surprised about how low Ollie Watkins is. And I will note that the last 10 game weeks incorporates a lot of substitute appearances for Ollie Watkins. It was when Rashford was there, and we know that Ollie Watkins was struggling a little bit for form. But even if you put it across the last 4 to 6 weeks, Watkins isn't getting tons and tons and tons of big chances. It's not like you're selling Isak for a Watkins that's getting 3 big chances a game. But even Alexander Isak himself, you can see here down at 0.46 non-pen XG per 90. That's not terrible data by any means, but we're used to seeing Isak with exceptional data. And even Watkins to some extent. So neither of these guys are in like a perfect run of form or getting tons and tons of big chances in their teams. I will note that. The other thing that I struggle with Watkins over Isak, and I'm a bit of a broken record here on this channel, I love penalty takers because we've seen it in recent weeks, right? Eze got the 10-pointer with a pen. Isak himself got a 9-pointer against Brighton with a pen. There have been so many more occasions that I can't think of off the top of my head. But a player can get a penalty and come away with between like 9 and 10 points with doing absolutely nothing else in the game. And that's always an advantage. Like Isak might be nowhere near as good. Let's say Watkins might get 4 big chances from open play across the last 2. Isak might get 0 big chances from open play. Isak could score 2-3 goals if he just gets penalties. And obviously you don't expect that, but it's just always nice to have that extra possibility for points. So that's always my concern. And I know Watkins isn't necessarily definitely off penalties, but the latest we heard from Emery is that it was Rashford 1. Obviously it won't be Rashford. Number 2 was Asensio. And then number 3 was one of McGinn, Tielemans, or Watkins. Well, Rashford and probably Tielemans are gone now in terms of injuries. So, yeah, Watkins might take one a bit ahead of Asensio, given that Asensio missed the last 2, but you just can't confirm that. Whereas with Isak, you absolutely know that even if Callum Wilson's on the pitch, Isak will be taking them. I don't want to sit on the fence here. I've kind of not really given you my opinion yet. I've just given you sort of pros and cons each way back and forth. If I had no other glaring issues in my team, I didn't have an easy route to go out there and get a Saka or a Palmer. As we'll discuss a bit later, I think they're both fantastic assets. I didn't have a John-Philippe Mateta that I could move to Watkins. So let's say that my only route to Watkins was to do Isak to Watkins. If you can do that for free, yes, I would do it. I won't sit on the fence for once, and I would say I would do that because I would look at it and just think Spurs and United as a pair, even if Isak was fully fit, it's just such a nicer set of 2 fixtures than Arsenal away and Everton at home. And I think both of them will probably get good chances, but I would imagine that Ollie Watkins and Aston Villa will score more goals over the final 2 game weeks than Isak and Newcastle will. It is always a risk, though, selling a penalty taker that is historically a fantastic finisher for a team that have everything to play for and having a really decent home game to end the season against Everton. So do it at your own risk. The only other final thing I will say is that most people might say if you're chasing, do the Watkins move, whereas if you're protecting, keep Isak. I actually think that their ownerships could flip this week. So recently, Isak's been at about 80 to 85% effective ownership, which means that you're gaining about 15% of Isak's points. So you're not really gaining much, but you're not obviously losing points if he does really well. On Ollie Watkins, he's been at about 5 to 10% effective ownership, right? So he's been a massive differential. So you might look at that now and say, oh, if you're chasing, you should do the Isak to Watkins move. I reckon at least 30 to 40% of the top 10k or the top 100k, wherever you're at, will probably sell Isak to Watkins or at least buy Ollie Watkins. So I think Watkins' ownership will shoot up, just raw ownership, to about 50 to 60%. And then remember, a lot of those will captain him. So I reckon we could see Ollie Watkins' effective ownership at those top ranks be at least 65 to 70%, maybe even higher. And Isak's might drop from 85 to about there as well. So I reckon Isak and Watkins' ownerships will probably be very similar. So I don't think it's as simple as saying if you're chasing by Watkins, if you're protecting, keep Isak. I think their ownerships might equal out this week. It's a very difficult decision. I'll leave it there. I'm not selling Isak because I've got the Mateta to Watkins move I can make. But if I didn't have that option there, especially if you're looking to captain Watkins, I think Isak to Watkins for free is a move I'd be willing to make. So I also had a few questions over on Twitter about how important is Watkins? Like, how much do we really need to get him in? Because a lot of people are already tripled up on Villa from their previous double game week. So one of the questions I got is Watkins worth 2 free transfers? I have Rodgers, Martinez and Konsa already. And then someone else asked, would you sell Konsa as part of a -4 to switch the third Villa spot to Ollie Watkins? I'm going to give the simple answer of no. I don't think this is a valuable use of 2 free transfers or taking a -4 to switch out an Aston Villa defender who, by the way, they've been defending extremely well just to get Ollie Watkins in. Especially a -4 hit. That just feels like a really unnecessary hit to take at this point of the season. I will elaborate on that, though, because there are some circumstances where I might do it. But just to speak about the Aston Villa defence, they've won back-to-back games now 1-0. Across the last 6 weeks, Aston Villa are third for XGC in the league. So Aston Villa are defending it incredibly well, and they're about to face Spurs and United, who, yes, Man United are creating chances, but we don't have players that can put the ball in the back of the net. And Spurs, in terms of their attacking data, they have dropped off a little bit. I mean, Crystal Palace kept a clean sheet, and Spurs only accumulated about 0.6 XG in that game. So I actually think that Konsa and Martinez are actually very, very playable in the next 2 game weeks. So you're taking out a defender that's probably a decent asset to own for the next 2 as part of a -4 just to get Ollie Watkins. I think that the only way that I would make this move is if I was extremely confident that Ollie Watkins was the best captaincy option this week and I really wanted to captain him. By the way, I might captain Watkins, but I don't think that Watkins is in like a league of his own. Like, he's absolutely the best captain. I think Palmer's great. I think Saka's actually great. I think he could do well against Newcastle at home. I think Salah against Brighton away is absolutely fine. I even don't necessarily dislike that much Morgan Rogers captain if you really wanted to target that game. I think there are tons of really decent captaincy options this week that are all pretty level. Even Brian Mbeumo against Fulham at home, great. There are tons of really good captaincy options this week that are pretty equal. So in that situation, for me, I don't think Watkins is standout enough that I would take the hit to do it, or even use my 2 free transfers. But if you're in a position where you're like, no, I think Watkins against this Spurs side, I think they'll rotate for the Europa League final. I think it's a game where there'll be loads of goals. I really want to captain him. Then by all means, take the -4. I always feel a lot better taking a -4 or using free transfers to do the switcheroo like this if I feel like I'm bringing in the best captain for that week. So I'll leave that with you. But again, if I'm trying to not sit on the fence, no, I wouldn't do it. I would go without Watkins and just hope that your other existing forwards, maybe plus your Villa defenders, do enough to outweigh whatever Ollie Watkins does. So one of the other big talking points this week is around City and Palace rotation and what to do with them ahead of Game Week 37. So just to remind you, we obviously had the Game Week 36 at the weekend, so a few days ago. Then for Game Week 37, the deadline is on Friday. We've got Manchester United, Chelsea and Aston Villa Spurs on the Friday because they then play the Europa League final the following Wednesday. Then on Saturday, we've got the FA Cup final between Crystal Palace and Man City. Lots of FPL games on the Sunday. Pretty much all of them are on the Sunday. And then on the following Tuesday, we have the Premier League games for Crystal Palace, Wolves, and also Man City, Bournemouth. So what that means is that Crystal Palace and City will play in the FA Cup on Saturday, and then a few days later on the Tuesday, they'll have their Premier League game. This causes issues for 2 reasons. Firstly, that's not a lot of time to recover, right? If they're playing on the Saturday, they'll only have the Sunday, Monday as rest days, and especially for the team that wins the FA Cup, you would imagine that there's lots of celebrations on the Sunday going into the Monday. They might not even have a proper full training day. So that becomes an issue. But secondly, it also means that the FA Cup game is played after the deadline. It's not even like we get the game to see what happens before the deadline because the deadline's on the Friday. So we are going into this completely blind, already having the potential issue of rotation, but not even being able to see what happens. So I can sit here and say, I think Eberechi starts in the Premier League. What happens if he picks up a knock? What happens if he plays 120 minutes and after the game's over, he literally collapses on the floor, Crystal Palace win? Well, then after seeing that, I'd say there's probably very little chance he does. So I kind of feel like it's literally impossible to know what's going to happen, but I can do my best to just hypothesize based on what might happen, what I expect. I would say that in terms of the squads, Crystal Palace should be easier to predict what will happen because they just don't have the same level of squad depth. I can't see a world in which both Eze and Sarr are rotated because, like, who are you playing instead? They've got, like, the Eze and Nketiah, because if you don't play Mateta and Nketiah, then you've got Kamada. I don't think they're going to rotate all of the assets like that, whereas City could conceivably switch out their entire front 3. It's the same with someone like Daniel Munoz. Like, they don't really have a perfectly viable alternative instead. So with Crystal Palace, because the squad is a little bit thinner, it feels a little bit easier. That being said, Crystal Palace don't have anything to play for now. They're not going to get 8th. So in the Premier League, do they really need to run their players into the ground and risk injury? With Man City, it's the opposite. Man City have everything to play for in the Premier League, so you would imagine that they go fairly full strength. The final home game of the season as well. But on the flip side, they've got a much bigger squad. So they could go full strength in the FA Cup and play, like, I don't know, let's say Marmoush, Haaland, Doku or something like that. And then it would still look pretty full strength if then against Bournemouth, they went for Grealish, Foden and Marmoush as the front three and Haaland dropped out. They could go for De Bruyne in both games or De Bruyne in one game. The squad doesn't look too much weaker if they go for their B team. So I'm finding it very difficult, but let me try not to sit on the fence here and say, that's the motto of the video, by the way, is me trying to actually give you an opinion, because I could just sit here and say, I don't know. I think that if Crystal Palace win the FA Cup, I think we will see a little bit heavier rotation. I would be very surprised, honestly, if Mateta starts. I just think, given how many minutes he's played recently, there's clearly some sort of form issue or fitness issue where he's just not even barely making it to 60 minutes. I think Nketiah probably starts in the Premier League, or at the very least, Mateta probably only just again makes it to 55, 60. So I think Mateta? I think Mateta is a fine sell. Eze and Sarr and Munoz, if you were to push me right now, I think they start in the Premier League against Wolves as well as the FA Cup final. But I still don't, again, I don't know. Like, if they get absolutely run into the ground, they pick up a small knock, they just don't look very good at the end of the game, then there's obviously a chance that they don't. I think Munoz is probably the safest because he's a fitness monster and has started every game. So yeah, if you were to push me right now, I think Eze, Sarr, Munoz start. I think Mateta doesn't. But I think if they win the FA Cup final, I think it makes it less likely that they start because they'll be celebrating. They won't have anything to play for in the Prem. And again, it might mean that it was more of a hard-fought battle, and therefore they might not all start. I've kind of sat on the fence slightly there. On Man City, I think that they'll go a little bit more full strength, and I think they'll be more willing to start the likes of Haaland and De Bruyne in back-to-back games, because again, they have to really go and win this game against Bournemouth, final home game of the season, and also they've not fully secured Champions League football. So I think that makes a little bit more sense to go full strength. So again, I think De Bruyne, Marmoush, Haaland have a very good chance of starting both the FA Cup final and the game against Bournemouth. So I guess what I'm saying here is I don't think rotation will be quite as bad as maybe we're necessarily fearing. But that's without having seen the FA Cup final. And it might be after the FA Cup final again. If it goes 120 minutes and Marmoush, Eze, Sarr all play 120, I might be sat there thinking, actually, rotation might be a little bit more rife than we thought. So I'm sorry to sit on the fence, but I guess I at least want to bring it up. What would my advice be? I think if you've got a really deep squad with really good options on the bench, and you can get away with benching a Marmoush, or you can get away with benching a Sarr, I probably would. But brilliant assets like Eze and Kevin De Bruyne, you don't really want to bench them, because if they do start, they're so fantastic. Whereas Sarr, the output's not been there. Marmoush has struggled a little bit recently. We obviously know with Haaland back, he's probably not on pens. They're assets that if you can get away with benching them, or I suppose selling them, then maybe I would. I would try and reduce the amount of risks that you have in your starting 11, and I think Crystal Palace and City assets are risks. And on Jean-Philippe Mateta, I think he's a perfectly viable sell, whether that be to Chris Wood or Ollie Watkins or Eva Nilsson. I think these are all really good assets. And the thing is with Crystal Palace as well, they've got Liverpool in 38. So if you're going to bench them in 37, you don't really want them in 38 anyway. You might as well sell them if you've got the free transfers to do so. So I'll leave it there, yeah. If I had De Bruyne and Eze, I would start the pair of them. If I had Sarr, Marmoush, Mateta, I would be willing to bench or sell them, because I just don't think they're perfect assets for the final 2 weeks anyway. So for those of you that can't afford Watkins, or maybe just don't want to look at Watkins and you think his ownership is going to shoot up and you want to go a little bit more differential, Jamie Vardy and Beto are both fantastic options in their own right for this week. They're very fun punts. They're so cheap, 5.3 million and 4.8. Ipswich at home and Southampton at home this week. Yes, the fixtures aren't ideal in 38, so if you have to play them in 38, maybe I wouldn't go for the punt there. But I think a lot of people have 8 attackers, right? So you might get away with benching them. And I also think someone like a Jamie Vardy in 38, final game. Obviously, 37 is the final home game. 38 being the final game, he could still do fairly well. And especially if he doesn't get that 200th goal in 37, well, then he's going to really want to do that in 38, right? And that is the real reason that you would go for Jamie Vardy. Because if you look at Jamie Vardy's data, it is absolutely horrific. Like, it burns the eyes. 0.12 non-penalty expected goals per 90. That means every 8 to 9 games, this man is getting an expected goal non-penalty. So across a 2-game spell, you're not expecting much from him based on what we've seen so far this season and across the last 10. You're not buying Jamie Vardy, though, for the data or because you think Leicester are a great team. You're falling in love with that narrative that it's his final home game for Leicester, 199 goals, he's going to want to get the 200th. Also, Jamie Vardy's on penalties. I said in the Isak section, Jamie Vardy therefore doesn't need to play well. If he gets a penalty, he can come away with 9 points. So I do like the Vardy pump because the fixture's there to attack. I do believe in things like motivation, and he is going to want to get that goal. But just because Jamie Vardy wants to score doesn't mean he will, right? Because if every time a player wanted to score, they scored, every player would have hundreds of goals a season. So it's not that simple in the Premier League. But Ipswich are a team where you would imagine that Leicester can create chances. And I think everyone in the Leicester team will know that this is Vardy's last home game. Everyone will know that he's on 199 goals. And I do think that to a large extent, they will try and force it a little bit more and try and get him that goal. So do I think Vardy will score against Ipswich? Yeah, I kind of do. But just because that narrative is there doesn't mean that he necessarily will. But I like it, especially for the penalties. On Beto is a better asset than Vardy. He absolutely is. Like, look at the data. 3 times the goal threat. Since Moyes came in, Beto's looked really good, and he was finishing his chances very well when Moyes first came into the team. So I think if you were to objectively ask me who's a better asset, Beto or Vardy, who should I buy? It is Beto. Like, he just is a better asset. And he's got a better fixture as well. Beto. Beto has a better fixture against Southampton at home. Like Southampton are a weaker defence than Ipswich. So everything points me towards saying I prefer Beto as an asset. The only concern I have with Beto is, firstly, we don't think he's first choice penalty taker. Like, I would imagine that if Calvert-Lewin's on the pitch, it'll be him. If Calvert-Lewin's not on the pitch, it'll probably be Iliman NDI. If neither of them are on the pitch, there is a chance that Beto takes it. So no penalties, probably. But also, they just have so many options, Everton, in terms of who they can play. So I think Iliman Ndiaye is normally going to play off the left, but he was on the bench in Game Week 36. You had Armando Broja as well. He was on the bench for Game Week 36, and Calvert-Lewin. You've got 3 options there that can play as the 9 that were just sat on the bench. So do I expect Beto to start the last 2 games? I absolutely do. Do I expect him to get close to 90 in either? No. I can't see it with those options all on the bench and Moyes wanting to get minutes. Like, Everton don't have as much to play for you. They can go up and down in the table, but I just can't confirm Beto's minutes in the same way as I can Vardy's. Vardy's going to start and get good minutes in the final home game of the season. He'll probably get a standing ovation at about 85, 88 minutes. And then Bournemouth away, I just don't see why they wouldn't start him again for the final game of the season. His final game for Leicester. So Vardy's got the penalties, slightly better minutes, but Beto has significantly better data. He's playing in a better team and has a better fixture this week. I'll leave the decision with you. If I were to bring in one this week, I would fully fall in love with the narrative of Jamie Vardy getting his 200th goal at home, final home game for Leicester, and I love penalties, so I would go for Jamie Vardy. But if you were to remove narrative, remove emotion, I do think that Beto's a better asset. So for those of you looking for a midfield transfer this week rather than the forwards, I do think the 2 that stand out are Saka and Palmer, if you can get there. And maybe we'll discuss some cheaper midfielders in the deadline decisions video later this week. So let me know if you're looking for some cheap midfielders too. But yeah, if you can't go for Watkins because you like your forward line, but you have the funds or ability to go and get a Saka or Palmer, honestly, even if it's part of a hit, I really don't mind it. But some people are choosing between, like, Palmer this week is a better asset, right? Manchester United at home, for me, is just such a good fixture. I don't hate the Newcastle at home fixture at all for Saka. I genuinely don't. I think he could do well. But I would rather Palmer this week. So people are deciding, do you go for Palmer now and then switch to Saka in 38, even if it costs a -4 hit because you have to make another move? Or do you just skip Palmer this week and go for Bukayo Saka this week and save the transfer? So the question I had was, would you prefer to go for Palmer now and take a -4 hit for Saka in 38, or go for Saka now and save the hit? I do think this one does come down largely to 2 things. Who are you captaining this week and how much are you chasing? Because if you're really chasing and you think you might captain Palmer, I would absolutely go for Palmer this week, even if it means a -4 for Saka in 38. But if you're protecting and you're trying to keep your mini-league lead, or you're trying to just maintain your rank, Palmer just won't be brought in by a lot of people because the form isn't there, and lots of other people are using their transfers on things like Ollie Watkins in, or they're saving their transfers for 38. So I just don't see Palmer's ownership going that high, so I don't think he'll massively harm you. Whereas Saka, I think Saka will be one of the most highly, if not the most highly transferred in players for 38. A few people have already kept him as well. Some people move this week. I would say by 38, Saka could be up at, taking into account captaincy, maybe like 70, 80% ownership. So I think if you're looking to really protect and maintain, obviously you need to think about what your mini league rivals will do. But let's talk about rank here. Saka is probably the right play because not only do you not lose the 4 points for the hit, but you're also owning what will be a very highly owned Saka in 38. Whereas Palmer, I think he'll be lowly owned. So what you could do is, yes, you could go for Palmer this week and captain him, or even just own him, and that would be a nice differential play. And then you could then sell to Saka in 38. But likely if you're chasing, you might just skip Saka altogether. So you might go for Palmer this week and then maybe captain. You could keep Palmer. I know that Forest traditionally have been a good defence, but they've not been in recent weeks. Across the last 10 weeks, they're the third worst defence in the league for XGC. So I actually don't even mind keeping Cole Palmer against Forest away. Palmer's away data has been pretty strong this season. So you could even keep Palmer for the final two, or you could go for Palmer, and then depending upon how much you're chasing in 38, you could then switch to a Martinelli, you could switch to a Kluivert, Semenyo instead, and maybe skip Saka altogether. So I don't think it's a simple one or the other. If I was doing it this week, I would probably chase the upside a little bit and go Palmer this week and then decide if I want to make the switch to Saka in 38. I don't know if I'd captain Palmer though, because I don't need to chase that much. So I'll leave it there. Again, I've not really answered it, but I think if you're chasing, go Palmer, right? There's no point. Saka against Newcastle at home is fine, but I would go for Palmer, chase the upside this week, then make a decision in 38. I think if you're happy with where you're at and you want to minimise hits and transfers across the final two, just go Saka now. He's got a home fixture this week. He looked very good against Liverpool. Southampton away, good captaincy option. You can't do badly having Saka for the final 2 weeks. Let me know if you're making a midfield transfer and you're going for one of these. Who are you looking at this week? So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 37 preview discussing some of the key players that you might be looking to buy and sell in your FPL teams. If you did enjoy this one, please do smash that like button. Let's aim for 1,500 likes on this video. And make sure to subscribe as well. I do really appreciate it. Later this week, we've got my team selection, deadline decisions, and a deadline stream on Friday as well. Thank you very much. Until next time, bye-bye.